Welcome to Get Paid for Your Pad, the definitive show on Airbnb hosting, featuring the best advice on how to maximize profits from your Airbnb listing, as well as real-life experiences from Airbnb hosts all over the world. Welcome. We are your hosts, Josefa Kapadia and Jasper Rivers.
Get paid for your pad. 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 Get paid for your pad.
This episode is brought to you by Hostfully, a company that helps you make a beautiful guidebook for your listing. Make your own at hostfully.com/pad, and as a special for Get Paid for Your Pad listeners, you get a free guidebook consultation after you make your first guidebook. Get Paid for Your Pad episode 104. Welcome everybody to this episode. Today it's just going to be me. I don't have a guest. Unfortunately, my guest canceled. And so that's why I'm recording this episode on Wednesday and not as usually on Monday. So in this episode, I figured I'm just going to go through a number of things that recently happened in the world of Airbnb. Airbnb has made some changes to the platform recently, and also lots of things have been going on in the Airbnb world. So I figured I'll mention a number of things that have come up in the news. But let's start with some of the changes that Airbnb recently has made to their platform. And some of them are quite substantial and can really change your performance of your Airbnb listing. So let's start with the title. Originally, the title was a maximum of 35 characters, and Airbnb has recently changed that to 50 characters. Now, that's only a 15 character difference, but that's actually quite significant because it's about a third of extra space that you get in your title. And of course, the title is quite important as it's one of the things that show up in the Airbnb search snippet. So, when somebody searches for a listing on Airbnb, the title plays a fairly important role. And that's why I think it's good that they've increased the amount of characters that you can use so that you have a little bit more space to try and sell your place. Now, let's get into the best way to use this extra space for your title. This is something that people still struggle with a little bit. I feel like Airbnb hosts have definitely gotten much better creating great listings. I remember when I first started back in 2012. I was looking for resources on how to create a great Airbnb listing and couldn't find very much. And I remember looking at some other listings in my neighborhood, and they looked pretty terrible, to be honest. The pictures weren't good, and there was very brief descriptions of the place. So I felt like I didn't really want to use those listings as an example for my own listing. And that's kind of what triggered me into, doing a lot of research and experimentation to figure out how to create a good listing. And, when you look at Airbnb listings now, most of them are actually pretty good. It's and that's obviously a result of all the efforts of Airbnb, but also all the other people like me who are creating resources on how to improve your listing. But the title is definitely something that people still struggle with. And so let me just go through some advice on how to use this space, how to use these 50 characters most effectively. So the first thing I'll say is, you definitely want to use all the space that's provided. I see a lot of titles out there that are just really short, and there's no reason not to use the space that you have. So really use all the space. It's very easy when you put your title in the box that Airbnb provides in your listing management system. It will show you how many characters you have left. So it's very easy to use almost all the characters. Now, when you look at an Airbnb snippet, and when I say Airbnb snippet, I really mean the whatever pops up when you search for a listing on Airbnb, which is, by the way, it's a very good exercise to do. If you want to know how to create an appealing listing, a great exercise to do is to pretend you're a guest. So if you've never used Airbnb as a guest, then you just go on the website and you just pretend that you're going to a certain place, and then you just look for listings and you figure out which of the listings would be the one that you would choose. And then you kind of note down what are the different things that you actually look at while making that decision. So when you look at the Airbnb snippet, now obviously the first picture is the one that shows up in the snippet, and that's what people will look at first. But then right below that, there you will find the title. And so I'd say that's the second most important part of the snippet. Now, there is some information that is displayed in the search snippet as well, and that's the type of space. So it's like whether it's an entire home or apartment or a private room. And so since this information is already being displayed, I think it's not very useful to mention that in your title. So, because I see some titles where people do mention that they say private room, or they say entire apartment, entire home, and these are things that it's not necessary to mention that because it's already being displayed in the search snippet. Now, the next piece of advice is that you want to highlight your property's best asset, and this is another exercise that I recommend that people do. It's actually one of the first lectures in my video course that I have published on Udemy. The second exercise that I make people do is to write down the best assets of your listing. So what are the reasons that people should stay at your place? Because there's thousands and thousands of Airbnb listings in most of the major cities. And so people have a lot of choice. And so you really want to sort of like have your place stand out by mentioning what your best asset of your listing is. So for example, let's say, if your apartment is very spacious, then you should mention that. If it's, it has a balcony with, a lot of sun during the day, then that's something that you could mention. Location could be your selling point, or whatever you think that is the best reason for people to stay at your apartment. And another place where you can look, by the way, is the reviews. I feel like people often overlook this, but when you look at the reviews, this is what your actual previous guests have experienced, and often your guests are much better at describing the experience and describing your space than yourself. So this is a great place to look for inspiration. Just go through your reviews and write down some of the things that keep coming up in your reviews. And if a lot of guests mention a certain aspect of your space, then it's quite likely that that's going to be one of your best selling points, and so you might want to mention that in your title. Another thing is a lot of people make their title very factual. They saw something like 2-bedroom in the name of the neighborhood, or the type of building, or whatever it may be. It's often very factual. And that doesn't really sound inviting to people to click on the listing. So instead of just sort of mentioning the facts, what you want to do is you want to make your title what they call catchy. And so what does catchy mean? Well, it means that it sounds appealing. And to make something sound appealing, you want to use descriptive words that make it easy for people to visualize. And so when you say something like luxurious or spacious, or like perfect location, those are things that people will find interesting. That these are the type of words that entices people to click on the listing. Last but not least, one thing you can do is you can use your title to cater to a specific crowd. So what I do, for example, is like my apartment is very well suited for groups of guests that consist of two couples. And the reason for this is that my bedrooms are on opposite ends of the apartment, and there's an outside staircase in between, so you can't really hear whatever is going on in the other bedroom, which is, as you can imagine, when you're a couple, you don't really necessarily want to hear what you're doing. You don't necessarily want others to hear what you're doing in the bedroom, of course. And so I use it in my title, so I say it's like it's a perfect for couples. And so, whatever it may be that you think is a good reason for people to stay in your apartment, whatever specific crowd you want to cater to, you can sort of use your title to do this. And that way you really stand out from the crowd. And, you might think, well, if I'm only going to, for example, in my case, if I'm going to say that my apartment is perfect for couples, aren't you going to exclude sort of, all the other groups of guests, all the other demographics? But I don't think that's the case. I mean, my apartment still gets booked by groups of guests that don't consist of two couples. It's not necessarily the case that other type of groups won't even consider my listing. It's just that for that particular group, my listing is going to stand out, and those people are definitely going to check out my listing. And it's better to be very appealing to a small demographic than to be sort of like adversely appealing to everybody. And so these are some of the tips that I would give for creating a good title. Now let's move on to the next item, which is the summary. So your title and your summary can both be found in your Airbnb management section under listing and then under description. So the summary is what shows up right below the pictures. There's a little header that says about this listing. And in the past, we always had 250 characters to fill up the space. And this is sort of the first thing that people look at after scrolling through your pictures. So it's still it's not the most important aspect of your listing, but it's definitely an important part. I think often what guests will do is they read the summary, but they won't read the full description. This becomes quite apparent when you get questions from guests, and now these questions are often the information is often already in your listing, but the fact that people still asking these questions shows that a lot of people just don't read the total description. I think this is actually one of the most common complaints from Airbnb hosts, is that they say, I'm getting all these questions from my guests, and I've already mentioned this, I'm providing all this information, and so the guests aren't reading the description, but most of the time they will read your summary. So this is an important part. It's now 500 characters up from 250. So what do you want to do with this summary? Well, again, it's kind of an extension of your title, right? You want to provide the most appealing aspects of your listing, the most important parts of your listing. And secondly, you want to write it in a descriptive way, in a way that it helps guests to visualize the experience. So instead of mentioning a lot of facts, so instead of saying like, oh, my house has a kitchen and it has a balcony, instead of that, you could say something like, after a long day of sightseeing in the beautiful city of Amsterdam, the balcony provides a perfect opportunity to enjoy the late afternoon rays of sunlight while enjoying a cold beverage. Or, I'm just making this up on the spot, but you get the idea. And then instead of saying, "Oh, I have a kitchen, it has a microwave, it has an oven, it has X pots and pans and stuff," a better way to say it would be something like, "The kitchen provides optimal space and has all the all the amenities and all the utensils that you need to create an awesome meal using all the awesome local ingredients that you can find at the market nearby. And so instead of going to a restaurant, why not use this opportunity to cook your own delicious meal with your friends. And then, of course, the dining table in the living room provides for a great place to actually enjoy that meal. So this way you're describing the experience, and when you describe an experience to someone, you make it easy for that person to visualize what it would be like to stay at your place versus just listing the facts. Anyway, that's so some of the most important changes that I've seen recently. There's a few other ones. There's now a tab that says Home Safety, where you can provide all sorts of information about the safety of your apartment. There's a safety checklist where you can tick off a couple boxes. There's also a place where you fill in some details regarding some of the safety features, like the fire extinguisher, like where it's located, the fire alarm, gas shut-off valve. Not sure exactly what that means, actually. You can provide instructions for where the emergency exit is and some emergency phone numbers as well. And you even have the option now to preview and print a safety card that you can then provide for your guests. So it's a nice little extra service that Airbnb started offering. I'm not sure if these things are already available in all markets, by the way, but they're showing up on my listing, so I'm assuming they'll probably be available in most major cities around the world. There's also a specific tab for check-in now, so you can set the check-in window. I set it to 3 p.m. to 10 p.m. Personally, and then I do the checkout by 12 p.m. So you can sort of like specify whatever your check-in times are. Another actually quite significant addition to the Airbnb platform is there's a tab now. It's called Management, and there's you can add additional hosts to your listing, which is really great because before this option existed, let's say you're going on a holiday and you need somebody else to manage your Airbnb listing because let's say you're not going to have any internet connection. Now, the only way to do this, or the only way that you used to be able to do this, is you would have to give somebody else access to your Airbnb listing, right? So now that's obviously you can do that. But now this person has complete control over your listing. Your Airbnb listing is something that you want to keep safe, and so it's not everybody would be comfortable maybe providing giving somebody complete access to your listing. So I think this is a much better option because the permissions are, you don't give away full control over your listing by adding an additional host. The permissions are the host can accept, decline, cancel, alter reservations, see and respond to guest messages, edit pricing availability, and adding the listing description, as well as interact with customer service on your behalf. But they can't access like your payout information, your personal details, and also as the listing admin, you can remove the other person at any time. One common question that I get from listeners is, what should I send to my guests before they arrive? It's really common for hosts to send a long email or a long text message to guests with information about check-in and also local recommendations. Now, a better way to solve this problem is by creating a beautiful online guidebook. So for my guidebook, I use Hostfully. They have a great product that helps me send all the details to my guests, and it's built for Airbnb hosts in particular, and their guests, of course. So if you have a chance, check them out at hostfully.com/pad, and they are completely free. All right, so that's it for the recent changes on the platform. Let's now go into some of the news items that I've recently come across. So first of all, Airbnb has raised another $850 million, which means that the total amount of money that they've raised is now $3.4 billion. And if the company is now being valued at $30 billion, which makes it the second most valuable startup in the history even of startups, but at least it's the most valuable startup after Uber. Now, Uber is I think valued at like 60 billion or something, which is pretty crazy as it's only been around for a very short amount of time. But Airbnb is the second most valuable startup at this time, and I don't know exactly what they are going to do with all that money. They haven't really provided much information, but I imagine they're going to use it to increase the amount of listings. To set up more offices in emerging markets in different places, and to kind of aggressively market themselves to expand their platform. And they've been growing really, really fast, right? I mean, I remember when I started in 2012, I think there was like 500,000 listings at the time, and now the most recent number that I've seen was something like 2.3 million listings. So in just 4 years, it's gone times 4, which is obviously like a incredible growth. So we'll see if they're going to use the money to improve some other things on the platform. I think one of the things that they should pour more money into is the customer service. The complaints that I get from hosts, and it's actually funny because some people seem to think that I actually own Airbnb as the company or the website, because I get emails from people saying like, hey, I tried to reach your customer support and it really sucks, I couldn't get a hold of anyone, you should improve it. Or I get emails like, hey, your website's not working properly, can you fix it? Which is kind of funny. I wish I owned Airbnb, actually. That would be quite nice, but that's not the case. But yeah, customer service is definitely something that they could improve on. So hopefully they'll use the money to make some improvements there. Now, I've also read a lot of articles recently about the legislation and the opposition against Airbnb, and I've talked about this in the past as well, but it's interesting because, whenever whenever something new comes into the marketplace, there's always winners and losers. There's obviously, in this case, I think the hotel industry is probably, the industry that's like not happy with the existence of Airbnb, because obviously they're afraid that they'll lose some clients. Which I'm not sure if that's actually the case, because I looked at some cities like Amsterdam, for example, and the amount of night stays in hotels actually hasn't really gone down. It's still been going up. So I feel like Airbnb actually, like it increases the pie. There's people that travel because of Airbnb that wouldn't otherwise be traveling, because some people just don't want to stay in hotels, So they with the existence of Airbnb now, they might be traveling more, or maybe they were staying with family or friends before Airbnb existed, and now they're, instead of staying with friends, they stay at an Airbnb. It's also, Airbnb has made it more affordable to travel as well, so that's probably had a small effect. But in any case, the one argument that the opposition of Airbnb always uses is, they say, oh, it's making housing more expensive, it's driving up rents, etc. And I've always felt like that's just not the case, And the reason is that the amount of Airbnbs, although there's 2 million or something right now, it's still a very small percentage of the total amount of accommodation that exists in different cities, and so it's just very unlikely that has such a profound effect. If you have a city with a couple million houses, and there's like a couple thousand Airbnb listings, that you're talking about like a percent or so. Yeah, and it's just very unlikely that that actually has a significant effect on rents. And so it's I can't prove that, obviously, because I don't have the data, I don't have the research, etc. But now a company called AirDNA, which is a company that provides data about Airbnb in mostly in the US, I think. They've come out with a study that sort of confirms that Airbnb's influence on rents is actually very small. And so, well, first of all, most Airbnbs are actually spare rooms, or there are apartments that are just being rented out when the owners are out of town. And so, that's not going to have a big effect on rents, But the opposition always talks about the commercial listings. They talk about the people that rent out their apartment full time. And so AirDNA has looked at the percentage of Airbnb listings that are, so to speak, commercial. And they define it as units that are rented for at least 180 days or more each year. And so they found that in the US, it's only 9.7% of Airbnb listings that are being rented out more than 180 days. So that's a pretty small percentage. As well, in addition, well, they do say that, if you look at the share of the revenue that comes from these 10% commercial rentals, it's actually almost a third. So almost a third of the total host revenue comes from those 10% listings that are rented out for 180 days or more. And so if you look at the amount of commercial listings because these are like sort of this is what the opposition complains about, right? Because they say, those commercial listings are, they're more like hotels. They take away accommodation space for residents, for people to live in. So if you look at New York, for example, the biggest US market for Airbnb, in New York, there's 2,500 commercial listings, and there's 2.2 million total rental apartments. So that's just over 1%. And I mean, there's lots of other factors that have a much stronger influence on rent prices. Now, another example is San Francisco. Rents in San Francisco have been going up for years and years like crazy, and I understand why a lot of people aren't happy with that. But I mean, again, to blame the 1 or 2% of Airbnb listings in a city for the significant rent increases, we're talking about like doubling rents over like a 5-year time span or something. It's just insane. Like it's they're just using Airbnb as a scapegoat, because think of all the other factors there that are at play. For example, recently the tech sector has been booming again. So, lots of high-paying employees are coming to San Francisco, and these people will have to have a place to live. And if you're making like $200,000 a year, you can easily pay like $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 a month for your for your accommodation. So I think those factors that's one factor in San Francisco that's just like, I think has a much stronger effect than Airbnb. And even if you look at the history of rents before Airbnb even existed, I mean, in the last like 20 years, rents have always been going up. There's no real acceleration going on worldwide in rent prices. So I think nothing really has changed. It's just with the existence of Airbnb now, there's a scapegoat that can be easily used. So I realized I've already been talking for quite a while. Now I just want to finish with some interesting facts about Brian Chesky, the CEO of Airbnb. I just found this article on the Business Insider, and it's some interesting stuff. I don't know. Did you know that Brian Chesky used to be a bodybuilder? No, that's pretty funny. I actually did know that, but I'm sure lots of people don't know it. The article has some other interesting interesting facts. Brian Chesky went to the Rhode Island School of Design, where he met Joe Gebbia, and these guys would eventually co-found Airbnb. And Gebbia told Chesky one time after they graduated, he told him, before you get on the plane, because he was going to move to San Francisco. So he's like, before you get on the plane, there's something I need to tell you. He said, we're going to start a company one day, and they're going to write a book about it. Which is true. I think there's now on Amazon, there must be over 50 books on Airbnb. Lots of people have written books about Airbnb, and I'm one of them. And so that statement definitely became truth. Another interesting fact is the article shows the first email, that Joe Gebbia wrote to Brian in 2007, when there was a design conference in San Francisco, and all the hotels were sold out, and these guys were having trouble paying the rent, and so Gebbia sent an email to Chesky, literally saying, Brian, I thought of a way to make a few bucks, turning our place into a designer's bed and breakfast, offering young designers who come into town a place to crash during the 4-day event, complete with wireless internet, a small desk space, sleeping mat, and breakfast each morning. Ha! And so, that was kind of the email that started Airbnb, which is pretty cool that Gebbia still has that email. And so later they went on and they teamed up with Nathan Blecharczyk. I was wondering if I pronounce his name correctly, but and since then now Airbnb is in like 34,000 cities, has been used by more than 60 million guests. And as I mentioned before, it's the second highest valued startup in the US currently. One last funny fact that the article mentions. It says that Chesky is currently dating an artist called Alyssa Patel, who he met on Tinder 2 years ago. I find that kind of funny because I use Tinder and it's a great app, but I wouldn't imagine that Brian Chesky, the CEO of Airbnb, actually would be in Tinder to find a girlfriend. You'd think it'd be fairly easy for him through his social network to find plenty of interesting women. So I just thought that was kind of funny. And then one last thing. Up until recently, Chesky was still renting his couch on Airbnb. And I know this is true because I know some people who are fairly close with him, and he has been hosting on Airbnb. He has still been renting out his couch for quite a while. But apparently recently he's shut down his listing because apparently he got caught by San Francisco law that requires hosts to register with the city, and so he was forced to take his listing down. So I don't know if this is true. I mean, it's the Business Insider, so it's a fairly reliable source. But in any case, it's pretty interesting. So with that, that's the end of this episode. Monday there'll be a new episode, and we'll see you next time on Monday. So bye.
Get paid for your pet. 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 Get paid for your pet.